peacefully and not worry about their safety. Parents would let their children go out and play on the street. In many of our small towns, people didn't even need to lock the doors. But after 3 terms of catch and release Liberal policies, crime is everywhere. Violent crime up 50%, gun crime up 116%. As the government wastes billions of dollars targeting hunting rifles while allowing gun smugglers and gangsters run free. Gang homicides up 78%. Auto theft 46%. Extortion up an eye-watering 357%. After the Liberals passed a law reducing penalties for extortion with a gun, a reduction in penalties that Mark Carney says he wants to keep. This Liberal crime wave is the direct result of government policies that put the so-called rights of criminals ahead of the rights of law-abiding Canadians. Laws that turn violent repeat offenders loose on our streets to offend again, like C5, which allows some of the worst criminals to serve their sentences in the comfort of their living room, only to walk out the front door any time they choose to offend all over again. Then there's Bill C-75, which lets violent criminals go free within hours of their most recent arrest, even if they have hundreds of prior convictions. In fact, police say that often these offenders are released before the paperwork on their arrest is even completed. And Mark Carney has said he will not change any of the catch and release Liberal laws. Like so many elites who don't have to feel the effects of their policies, he agrees with them. When he lives in a protected neighborhood, he is surrounded by security. He spent most of his adult life not even living in Canada. He has no idea what it's like to feel endangered in his community. With Mark Carney, you will get 4 more years of the same out-of-touch Liberal catch and release laws that have caused the problem in the first place. A perfect example of this catch and release approach is the Liberals' failure to respond to the Supreme Court's decision in the Alexandre Bissonnette case. A man who carried out a vile murder of 6 innocent people, a premeditated attack on peaceful worshippers, gunning them down, execution style. Now, the trial judge in the Bissonnette's case decided that he should not be eligible for parole for at least 40 years. Now, I think that's too little. The judge reached this sentence by applying the Protecting Canadians by Ending Sentence Discounts for Multiple Murderers Act. A previous Conservative government had introduced that act. It was meant to get rid of the bulk discount for multiple murderers that allowed them to serve all their sentences at once. But later on, the Supreme Court thought that sentence was too severe. Let's be clear. The earlier sentence would have allowed Bissonnette to be free after 60 years, and at the age of 60, after 40 years. But the Supreme Court thought that was too harsh. So he kills 6 people, and the Supreme Court thought it was too harsh to have him stay in prison until he's age 60. So they struck down the law. Now, Bissonnette will be eligible for release after just 25 years. That works out to 4 years of jail time for every murder he committed. Think about that for a second. What happened to the principle of proportionality? You get 4 years behind bars for taking the life of another human being? This is insane. And it has to stop. You know, that was back in 2022, this decision was made. 3 years have gone by, and Mr. Carney and the Liberals have done nothing to reverse it, and they can reverse it. As a result of the court's decision, multiple murderers can now be let out of prison after just 25 years. They don't even serve a single real life sentence for any of the murders. And it's not just Bissonnette, it's Justin Bourque, who was convicted for his horrific shooting spree in which he murdered 3 RCMP officers and injured 2 others in Moncton. The trial judge in this case deemed his crimes worthy of 75 years without parole. But following the Supreme Court's decision, he will be eligible for parole potentially after 25 years. Again, 3 RCMP officers dead, their families destroyed, and he will effectively serve 7.5 years for each murder he committed. That means he could walk free on his 50th birthday after taking 3 lives and injuring others. Now, Parliament has the legitimate constitutional authority and the moral duty to correct this injustice and restore common sense sentencing with no more discounts for multiple murderers. Every life matters, and someone who takes multiple lives should be held accountable for each one. That's why I'm announcing today a Conservative government will reintroduce and pass the law that empowered judges to impose consecutive sentences for killers convicted of multiple murders. The worst mass murderers should never be allowed back on our streets. For them, a life sentence should mean what it says, a life sentence. They should only come out in a box. We will do this using Parliament's legitimate constitutional authority under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that allows Parliament to act to protect the charter rights of Canadians. And let me talk about those charter rights. I am here today to defend the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, particularly for law-abiding Canadians and victims of crime. The Liberals have systematically violated the charter rights of Canadians to life, liberty, and security of the person, as defined in Section 7. By allowing repeat murderers back out on the street, Liberals are violating the rights of law-abiding people to live in peace and security. By allowing rampant offenders with 200 or 300 convictions to be released within hours of their most recent arrest, Liberals are violating the constitutional rights of the next victim that those criminals will target. I will protect the Charter of Rights for a change. I will also introduce a 3 strikes and you're out law, stopping criminals from, who have been convicted 3 times from ever getting bail, parole, probation, or house arrest. It will be jail, not bail. They will serve a minimum of 10 years behind bars, after which they will have to earn their release through perfect behavior, clean drug tests, and by learning an employable skill that guarantees they'll be working and not doing crime if and when they can be released. We'll give mandatory life sentences for human traffickers, gun smugglers, and fentanyl dealers. We will bring in tougher sentences for intimate partner violence. We will shut down drug dens, ban hard drugs, secure the border against trafficking, and treat 50,000 Canadians suffering from addiction. A new Conservative government will restore Canada's promise that hard work gets you a great life in a beautiful, affordable home on a safe street. That means not just ending crime, but reining in Liberal inflation and making things affordable again. We'll cut income tax by 15% so that hard work pays off. We'll get rid of the sales tax on new homes to save people up to $65,000 on their purchase, while incentivizing municipalities to cut their taxes on homes by another $50 grand, so that you can reduce the cost of housing by $100,000, and our young people will again be able to afford a nice house to live in. We'll secure our borders and our future. Bringing home the Canadian promise is my purpose in this election, and the choice for Canadians is going to be very simple. After the lost Liberal decade of skyrocketing costs and crime, do Liberals deserve a 4th term? Or is it time for a change? Change so that you can afford food and housing. Change so that you're safe on your street. Change so that your paycheck grows faster than your cost of living. That is the change we need. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
Merci. On va maintenant passer aux questions.
Bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre.
Bonjour.
Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada.
Oui.
Hello, Mr. Poilievre.
Oui, ça va très bien.
How are
Merci
you?
vous-même.
Yes, I'm very well, thank you.
Ah, OK, c'est votre question. C'est déjà une question qui...
Oh, that was your question? Okay, that already has counted as one question. Now, you refer to the Supreme Court decision. Do you believe those decisions have value? Yes. Yes.
Et on va respecter.
And we will respect the decisions handed down by the Supreme Court while also protecting people's safety and security. And we will use the means provided in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in order to put an end to this wave of violent crime that has come about as a result of Liberal policies. It's necessary in that case to do so because otherwise multiple murderers will be released from jail to kill more people. No, I am strengthening the Charter of Rights and Freedoms by invoking Section 33 to keep violent criminals, dangerous criminals in prison and protect the security and the life of people who are law-abiding citizens.
So the question is, do I respect Supreme Court decisions? The answer is yes. And I also respect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which guarantees life, liberty, and the security of the person to every single Canadian. That right has been trampled on by the Liberals' catch-and-release laws that have unleashed crime and chaos in our communities. And I will use Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to put an end to the Liberal crime and drug wave and to protect law-abiding Canadians against the dangers that are spreading everywhere in our streets.
Merci. On passe à la prochaine question.
Yes, Joel Goldberg from the Suburban newspaper.
Yes, sir.
On the issue of disorder and chaos, there's been plenty of it in Montreal in the past year and a half from anti-Israel protesters, including recently at Cavendish Mall, where the protesters were able to stay for 2 hours. Police claimed that they couldn't eject them because they hadn't committed a crime, even though there are criminal code provisions that enable them to do so. What would a Poilievre government do to encourage the enforcement of the criminal code in such situations?
Thank you very much. Well, after the lost Liberal decade of crime and chaos and breakdown in our society, we can't afford a fourth Liberal term. We need a change to bring law and order and respect. I want to condemn, first of all, the Liberal approach of dividing Canadians. We see Mr. Carney playing Justin Trudeau's trick of saying one thing to one group and exactly the opposite to another, inflaming sides to cause division while refusing to enforce the law. That will end when I'm Prime Minister. I will say the same thing to everyone, everywhere. And I will stand up for the right of Jewish Canadians to proudly live their lives, practice their faith, and enjoy their freedom. That includes wearing a Star of David, a kippah, or having a mezuzah on the door, and doing all of those things in total security. How? Well, we'll be bringing in tougher laws that crack down on hate-based vandalism, on violence and targeted at places of worship. We will bring in more security for places of worship. And we will deport from Canada anyone here on a visitor visa who carries out any crime. And we will prioritize the deportation of those who carry out hate crimes and violence on our streets. Those who are permanent or citizens who do those things, they will go to jail. And they will also, on top of that, there will be massive, crippling financial penalties for hate-based vandalism. And I can assure you they will be penalties that are so massive that there will never be, again, some punk thinking even once about throwing a Molotov cocktail into a Jewish business or firing at a Jewish school. They will pay a severe price for that. My message to the Jewish community, change is coming, and that change will mean you feel safe, you feel respected, you feel at home again in Canada. Thank you.
En français aussi, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup. Le chaos qu'on nous
Thank
voyons
you.
dans nos rues
The chaos
est
we're seeing in our streets is unacceptable.
Des groupes haineux sont en train de
Hate
semer
groups
le chaos,
are
ciblant nos communautés juives
causing
à travers le
chaos in
Canada.
the streets, targeting Jewish
Font partie
groups,
la responsabilité du gouvernement libéral
And the Liberal government deliberately divided people, pitting them against each other for political reasons. Mr. Carney did exactly the same thing as Mr. Trudeau. He says one thing to one group and something different to another in order to provoke decision and dissension. That is unacceptable. You have to say the same thing everywhere. Second, Liberal laws are causing chaos in our streets and preventing police from doing their job. That, again, is unacceptable. After the lost Liberal decade, with rising costs and rising crime and chaos in the streets, we cannot afford a fourth term. We need change with a new Conservative government that will bring back law and order. I will introduce laws with massive financial and jail terms for people who damage property, who engage in criminal action that is based on hate, and if visitors engage in criminal actions and target Jewish Canadians and other Canadians, there will be very severe penalties for violently attacking these individuals and vandalizing Jewish communities. We will unite Canadians, and my message to the Jewish people of Canada is that I hope you have hope, because change is coming. And once again, you will feel safe and respected and able to practice your faith, put a mezuzah on your door, wear a kibbah, and practice your faith openly. That's the promise of Canada that we will restore.
Bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre, Anne-Sophie Jobin pour TVA Nouvelle.
TVA Nouvelle.
Est-ce que vous pourriez utiliser la clause dérogatoire pour
Could you invoke the notwithstanding clause for other reasons under the Charter? Only to combat crime. We will simply invoke the notwithstanding clause to counter criminality and never to remove rights from Canadians. I intend to use every possible means under the Constitution to put an end to the wave of crime provoked or brought about by the Liberals. And that is the reason. And the reason, of course, is to protect the rights of Canadians. Canadians who are being threatened by pro-crime laws that the Liberals brought in.
Merci. On passe à la prochaine question.
The question was, will you use it for other things? And the answer is, we will only use Section 33 to fight crime. We will only use it to end the Liberal crime wave, which they have unleashed with catch-and-release hug-a-thug laws. We will reverse all of those laws, and we will bring in the biggest crime crackdown in Canadian history to protect the constitutional charter rights of Canadians to life, liberty, and security of the person.
Merci. On passe à la dernière question.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre.
I should just say one last thing, because after the lost Liberal decade of skyrocketing crime and costs of living, we cannot afford a fourth term. We need a change with a new Conservative government, so you can have food that you afford, homes you can afford, streets that you're safe on, and a paycheck that grows faster than your cost of living. Thank you.
Hi, Mr. Poilievre,
Yes.
3 Global News. Is there an example of when a mass murderer has been set free? Does the parole board not usually rule against that?
Well, the problem is that the ruling just happened in 2022. So the clock started ticking on these cases in that year. So what we will see is 25 years forward, these offenders will be eligible for parole. And it should, when you kill 6 people, you should never be eligible for parole. You should never be able to force the families of the victims to have to come and testify at a parole hearing so that they relive the hell that you've exacted on them. This is completely obvious The principle of a fair justice system is proportionality. And when you kill 6 people to be eligible to go back on the streets only 25 years later is not only disproportionate, but it is a violation of the charter rights of the victims and of their families. And I will use the charter to protect the charter. I will also use the charter to put an end to the liberal crime wave that has been caused over the last 10 years. We can't afford a 4th liberal term of skyrocketing crime and costs. We need a change with a new government so you can afford your food and homes, so you can walk safely in your streets, so your paycheck grows faster than your cost of living. Thank you.
En français aussi, s'il vous plaît.
La question, c'est
The question was
est-ce que un meurtrier multiple a été libéré?
whether a multiple murder has actually been released. The judgment came down in 2022. Therefore, it will take some time for the judgment to apply. But why should those murderers be able to call for their freedom 25 years later, forcing the family to come and testify at a bail hearing and live through the same hell that murderer already caused them? That makes no sense. I will use the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to protect rights and freedoms of the victims, people who are law-abiding citizens, and to put an end to the wave of crime unleashed by the Liberals with their extreme policies. We cannot afford a 4th term, a 4th period of liberal policies. We need change so that you have affordable home, affordable food, and safe streets.
We have been listening into Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre as he is speaking in Montreal this hour. Hello and welcome inside the CBC newsroom. I'm Arthi Pol. What we heard there from Pierre Poilievre essentially saying that he is vowing that he will invoke the notwithstanding clause to overturn a Supreme Court ruling that struck down a law allowing for consecutive sentences with longer periods of parole ineligibility. And so that is part of the announcement that we heard right there from the Conservative Party leader. We will also be hearing from the Liberal Party leader this morning. It is just before 10 a.m. Eastern Time, and we are exactly 2 weeks away now from voting day, when millions of Canadians will be heading to the polls. But we first want to discuss a little bit of what we heard from Pierre Poilievre there. I want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She was listening in. She joins me now from Ottawa. Janice.
Yeah, just a point of clarity in terms of the how of this, first of all, because I think people listening at home might be like, wait a minute, overturn a Supreme Court ruling? What he's proposing to do would be to bring in legislation once more, as the Harper government did, which would allow for consecutive sentencing, like stacking sentences. So if someone commits multiple murders, rather than just getting one sentence for multiple murders, you could stack them upon each other, which would sort of decrease the amount of time required to be served before that individual would be eligible for parole. This is, you know, a specific sort of response, and Poilievre was very clear here that this would only be done in a circumstance where they want to protect victims of violent crimes. It wouldn't be something sort of they would do in other circumstances, but extraordinarily, a government led by Poilievre, a Conservative government, would use the notwithstanding clause. This would be the first use of Section 33 of the Charter to make sure that a future court could not strike down this legislation the way it was struck down when the Harper government brought in a law for consecutive sentencing. That happened in 2011. In 2022, the Supreme Court struck it down. This, of course, greatly concerned the family members, victims of crime, who felt this was very unfair. When you heard the Conservative leaders speak about this, they often use words like sort of a bulk discount for crimes that see people are allowed to sort of go free after a shorter period of time than they think is fair. To be clear, though, it's not a case where they sort of go free. It's about eligibility for parole. Whether someone actually gets out once they're eligible for parole, of course, depends on the parole hearing itself. Someone who has committed multiple murders, multiple serious violent crimes, that person isn't always a good candidate for parole. It's not automatic parole after 25 years. They don't always kind of get out. Some of these heinous cases that we're talking about here. So again, sort of what they are referring to are somewhat hypothetical cases. Nevertheless, when the court rules, it found that sort of in the unanimous view of Supreme Court justices, it would be a violation of a charter right to say that there would never be a circumstance where someone was eligible for parole. So that is sort of what the Conservatives are looking at. It was interesting. They had alongside this announcement a number of their local candidates, including one who is a former head of Quebec's Association for Provincial Police Officers. Also, Pierre, a senator who has been touched by crime personally himself in the past and is probably one of the best known advocates for victims of crimes in the province of Quebec, very much trying to sort of touch on that as a way to appeal in Montreal. And I took note during the question and answer session, the particular answer brought forward by a question, frankly, from the community about protection for the Jewish community in Montreal. Of course, hate crimes, violent crimes against them, making them feel unsafe in the community. A big part of the Conservative pitch to that community, trying to win a seat on the island of Montreal, with the help of the Jewish community, they're very much a part of this campaign. We've seen some very kind of vigorous, active sort of battles for endorsements and outreach to that community for a number of years now, frankly, trying to kind of make a breakthrough for Conservatives on the island of Montreal. So trying to sort of tie in protection for that community that have been victims of hate crimes in the past with this bigger idea of doing more for the victims of crime. But interesting, sort of when pushed, would you use the notwithstanding clause for other things, as we've seen sort of, I think, 4 different provincial governments do for various reasons. Poilievre said, nope, this is like a narrow application that federally we would only use it in these particular sort of crime law contexts. So the pitch there definitely kind of in keeping with sort of Conservative pitches in previous elections, but kind of circling back to one that they believe they have considerable kind of public support behind.
Janice, thanks for this. And of course, we're also keeping an eye on Liberal leader Mark Carney. He will be speaking this hour, and Janice will join us again for that. That's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. And as we heard too, of course, this is also debate week, and we will be watching to see how all of those federal party leaders perform during both the English and French language debates. CBC News will bring you live coverage of those debates this week in Montreal. The French debate is on Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. It will be broadcast live with simultaneous interpretation on CBC News Network and everywhere you can stream CBC News. And the English language debate then is on Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on CBC TV and CBC News Network. It will be rebroadcast at 9 p.m. Pacific on CBC News Network and CBC Gem. So we have got you covered. And also another quick reminder for you, CBC News Network is free to watch for the remainder of the federal election campaign. In fact, until May 5th, you can watch Canada's #1 news network through your cable provider or online on CBC Gem, CBCNews.ca, and on the CBC News app. Okay, lots of news happening today. U.S. President Donald Trump is also promising more details on his ever-changing tariff policy. It follows a weekend of confusing messaging from the White House and top Trump officials about tariffs targeting computer chips and consumer electronics like iPhones and laptops. The CBC's Richard Madden is in Washington for us, tracking all these developments. He joins us now live. Hey, Richard. Okay, can you bring us up to speed on what Trump and his officials have been saying over the last couple of days?
Yeah, hey, good morning. Yeah, it's been a lot of confusion and chaos, and this is the latest major plot twist to this administration's chaotic tariff agenda. Now, President Donald Trump is now saying his punishing 125% tariff exemptions on tech devices, like you outlined off the top, laptops or smartphones imported from China, could be short-lived. Now, this sounds like a reversal from just 3 days ago when Trump announced tariff exemptions to most electronic device imports from China, as he faced growing pressure behind the scenes from tech giant Apple and other exports who warned consumer prices would spike. So in response, we saw markets rally, especially the tech-heavy NASDAQ, as investors breathed a sigh of relief. But then, a plot twist. Last night, Trump posted on his website, quote, "There was no tariff exemption." But despite the fact that the word exemption, you can't really see it here on the monitor, but the word exemptions is literally on the headline of Trump's own tariff executive order. Now, Trump went on to write, no one was getting off the hook. And later, on board Air Force One, Trump said he'll soon slap more tariffs on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, announcing details of his plan, possibly later today. Take a listen.
The tariffs will be in place in the not distant future because, as you know, like we did with steel, like we did with automobiles, like we did with aluminum, which are now fully on, we'll be doing that with semiconductors, with chips, and numerous other things.
Okay, so this morning we're seeing the White House playing cleanup, insisting they always plan to reinstate tariffs on Chinese imports and planning a separate tariff on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, and they're planning to do it under the guise of national security, also referred to Section 232. Here's how Trump's top economic advisor explained how this will all work.
The way to think about 232 is that if you've got a cannon, but you've got cannonballs that you have to buy from the enemy, then if there ends up being, some kind of action with the enemy, then you might run out of cannonballs really fast. And so it's okay to put a tariff on a cannonball. This plan has been basically the plan from the beginning. From the beginning, we've been talking about which things are 232s, which things are covered by the Reciprocal Trade Act. And so nobody should think that there was a surprise or anything at the last minute last week.
Okay, so just to recap, from Friday, there were tariff exemptions on electronics. That's now back on. There's more steel and aluminum tariffs. We're hearing more about pharmaceuticals and other products. So this tariff whiplash continues to rattle markets almost in real time. It's causing confusion and uncertainty. Take a listen to how Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren describes Trump's tariff rollout.
It is a mistake to have the President of the United States out there just playing red light, green light and saying, oh, this morning I woke up and think the tariff should be this big. That doesn't put the economy in a better place. That doesn't put investors in a better place.
So it's really tough to keep up on these changing tariff strategies. And we're already seeing new data points showing that consumer confidence is slowing. There's more talk of investor uncertainty and growing concerns of a self-inflicted recession. So I think it's safe to say we can expect more tariff whiplash from this administration because what's true one day may not be true the next as this administration continues to send more mixed signals and mixed messaging.
Another thing, of course, that people are tracking is the sign whether or not Washington or Beijing is backing down in the trade war. We're going to continue to track that. But, Richard, I'm going to have to let you go at the moment because we continue our election campaign coverage here in Canada. And the Liberal Party leader, Mark Carney, is speaking this hour in Dorval, Quebec. And we want to tune our viewers into his announcement.
First of all, I'd like to begin by thanking the exceptional candidates who are part of our team for joining me today. And I particularly want to extend my warm thanks to Bombardier for hosting us today. Bombardier is synonymous with quality, with innovation, ambition, and reliability. And all of those qualities are required right now because we are in the middle of a crisis, an unprecedented crisis. For months now, we have been under repeated attack by the United States. President Trump is attacking Canadian workers. such as the workers here at Bombardier. He's attacking Canadian businesses. He is even attacking our very existence as a free, distinct, and sovereign country. He is attacking our identity and our way of life. We simply must draw the necessary lessons from this situation and face a world that has been profoundly transformed.
Our world is changing. It's becoming more dangerous and divided. Our adversaries are increasingly emboldened, and the norms that have kept Canada and the world secure and prosperous are in peril. The priorities of the United States, once closely aligned to ours, have shifted. The threats to our sovereignty are multiplying. And in response, we have to give our armed forces the new resources that they need to defend our sovereignty with a made-in-Canada defense procurement approach that will help our defense businesses to grow here at home, all while diversifying their markets and growing their cooperation and sales abroad. For too long, our military has been both underfunded and overly reliant on the United States. Under the last Conservative government, when Pierre Poilievre was a minister, we in Canada were spending less than 1% of our GDP on defense. The Conservatives starved our armed forces, and shamefully they abandoned our veterans, closing offices across the country. La situation s'est améliorée dans les dernières années.
The situation did, however, improve in recent years. Through the naval shipbuilding strategy, the Liberal government created good jobs and wealth in the naval shipyards right across this country. And that is particularly the case in Quebec. Since we reversed the decision of the previous Conservative government, which had unfairly excluded the Davie shipyard. The government is modernizing NORAD by investing in new technologies and working with new partners. The government is defending the North and the people who live there with new military facilities and an increased presence by the Canadian Armed Forces.
Since the end of the Harper-Poilievre Conservative government, defense spending has more than doubled. More than doubled. But it's still not enough for the new world we live in. Nous devons en faire plus.
We must do more. And that is why I announced our plan for the Canadian Armed Forces, which is to rebuild, reinvest, and rearm. We will increase the capabilities of the Canadian Navy with new submarines and icebreakers in order to defend the North and Canadian waters. This is an unprecedented increase in our military spending, which will enable us to defend all of our territory and assert our sovereignty, as well as that of our allies abroad. We will ensure that our military forces here in Canada have the same equipment as those defending our allies abroad. We will increase the capabilities and the scope of the Canadian Coast Guard and make it an integral part of our defense infrastructure. At the same time, we will give it the mandate to carry out surveillance operations in order to protect our waters and provide the necessary equipment to do so. We will be deploying drones, aquatic and aerial vehicles that are unmanned to defend the Arctic, our infrastructure underwater, our borders, and our allies.
We are also modernizing NORAD, investing in new technologies and working with new partners, including Australia. We're building new military installations and increasing the presence of the Canadian Armed Forces in the Arctic year-round to defend our sovereignty, the North, and those who call it home. il faut non seulement investir.
We must not only invest, we must give ourselves the tools we need to assert our sovereignty and support Canadian expertise as we build our military industry. Today, I am announcing how we will attain these goals.
Today, I'm announcing our plan to build the tools needed to ensure Canada's sovereignty, to support a new approach to made-in-Canada defense procurement while helping our industries and businesses reach new markets around the world. A
new Liberal government will renew our military procurement strategy through a new agency which will centralize equipment procurement and prioritize, wherever possible, equipment produced here in Canada. We will reinforce the Canadian defense industry and strengthen our supply chains. We will give ourselves the necessary capabilities to respond to the needs of our armed forces without depending on other countries, such as the United States. We will do that by using steel, aluminum, and critical minerals from right here in Canada. We will rely on the expertise of our own companies and our own workers and ensure that they benefit from our strategy. We will give ourselves the necessary resources to assert our sovereignty while at the same time creating good jobs and wealth here in Canada.
At the core of our new strategic approach to defense and security, we will also establish Borealis, the Bureau of Research, Engineering, and Advanced Leadership in Innovation and Science. Borealis will advance cutting-edge research in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and other frontier technologies essential to safeguarding Canadian sovereignty. Because today, defense is not only about manpower, it's about brainpower. Borealis will drive innovation in terms of security technologies, enhance our capacity to deter threats, and strengthen Canada's technological superiority, all helping to ensure Canadian safety and Canada's sovereignty for decades to come. We won't only bring the Canadian Armed Forces up to today's standards, we will also build a military that is ready to fight threats that Canada is facing, and we will protect Canadians now and into the future. And in that process, we will create good high-paying jobs and prosperity here at home through a made-in-Canada procurement strategy. And we will help the Canadian defense businesses diversify their exports through an expanded Can-Export program that will take full advantage of our existing trade agreements with countries around the world. A key element will be to boost Canada's domestic defense industries and production as we build security with our reliable global partners. And that includes advancing Canada's involvement in the new Rearm Europe plan in support of transatlantic security, while we prioritize investment here in Canada with every dollar spent wisely and effectively. All these measures will ensure our safety and sovereignty and enable Canada to play a leadership role around the world, including, for example, in our participation in the Coalition of the Willing in support of Ukraine, and by our contributions to the broader security of our European partners. Nous allons bâtir des forces
We will build our Canadian armed forces so that they are ready to fight the threats Canada is facing and protect Canadians today and in the years to come. We will strengthen and renew our trading relations with reliable partners. We will give ourselves strong armed forces and strong trading relationships. We will give ourselves Canada strong.
Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Merci, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Nous allons maintenant prendre des questions de la délégation pour une quinzaine de minutes, ensuite des questions des médias locaux. First question, première question.
Good morning, David Aiken, Global News. How are you? Very well. Many governments have promised to fix defense procurement. I'd like to get you, you've announced some methods you're saying. Can you give us more details on how you'll fix procurement and why you think you'll succeed?
I think the, thank you for asking a process question, because sometimes at the core of government, we really do, in fact, all times, we need to distinguish between announcements and what actually happens and how you actually get results. So this is very much, a lot of this is about process. And the first thing is to take procurement into a new, defense procurement into a new centralized agency. So that there's a focus on delivering the security that Canadians need with the equipment that we need, to provide that agency with greater powers and flexibility so that there are exceptions, for example, with respect to the level of competition that's required in terms of defense contracting, speed with which contracts can be struck, integration and a priority put on Canadian suppliers and Canadian supply chain that's going to deliver it, and then as well integrating, and this is one of the points I made towards the end, and this is, I think, very important, integrating with the new approach that's being developed in Europe, in the European Union, so-called Rearm Europe. It may be rebranded, but Rearm Europe, which is a major defense initiative. And we've been talking directly to our European partners, both at the national level, the French government, for example, and the European level, to ensure that Canada, or to enable Canada to be part of that process so that we are part of that entire defense supply chain. Obviously, we get economies of scale, economies of scope, efficiencies from that, but we diversify our reliable partners. So there's change to process in terms of speed, scale, expertise, and there's change to the relationships in terms of, or there's development of relationships with new, very large, reliable partners that we come through.
Follow-up.
Campbell Clark, the Globe and Mail. You've talked about a made-in-Canada defense procurement. You've put the F-35 acquisition under review. The CEO of this company, Bombardier, has raised concerns about that, about losing reciprocity and access to the U.S. market for their products. There's a U.S.-Canada defense agreement that allows Canadian companies to bid on U.S. military contracts. So will your policies lead to Canadian companies losing access to U.S. defense bidding?
That's thank you, Mr. Clark, for that question. Look, the intention is not for that, but the intention is also to recognize, and our duty, I think, is to recognize how the relationship, both economic and defense and security relationship with the United States, is shifting. As there's greater emphasis in the United States on domestic industrial strategy and a host of areas, that has implications for the way we approach our defense procurement. There's an enormous opportunity as well as we dramatically increase our defense spending to ensure that as much as possible we have the maximum economic benefit here in Canada through great companies such as Bombardier, but many others from CAE and others across the defense supply chain. We will have, this is one other reason, as if we needed another reason, one other reason why the upcoming negotiations with the Americans on a new economic and security partnership that President Trump and I agreed on, why that is so important, and why it's important who's at the table, and that when Canada arrives at that table, that there is a comprehensive made-in-Canada approach to our interests, so that we're negotiating on behalf of the biggest impact for Canada. En ce qui concerne en français ici, les relations commerciales et économiques
trading, economic and security relationship with the United States is shifting, and as a result, we need a Canadian industrial strategy, a made-in-Canada strategy, including in the defense sector. And we are significantly increasing our military spending here in Canada, and it is preferable that we ensure there is maximum impact in Canada, particularly in the context of negotiations that will begin in early May, the negotiations between ourselves and the United States, as agreed with President Trump and myself. And therefore, it's important to have a Canadian government with a military, security, economic and industrial strategy in place in order to promote the prosperity and security of Canada.
Today you're talking about a made-in-Canada procurement strategy. You're also talking about negotiating with the United States.
Yes.
So are you willing to negotiate away your made-in-Canada strategy in order to retain access to U.S. defense markets?
Again, thank you for the question. So let me give an example specifically, if I may draw on the situation here. So what's happening, and it's a very fluid trading situation, as you know, with the United States. But certain exemptions, for example, under the, I will call them the fentanyl tariffs, the unjustified fentanyl tariffs, are for what are called CUSMA compliant trade. Okay? So if you have certain thresholds of production, I'm explaining for broadly, I think you know this, but for a production here in Canada and with other CUSMA partners, and you can verify that, then you're not subject to those fentanyl tariffs. That is an opportunity on which we can build in terms of the upcoming negotiation. And that's an opportunity that will integrate a Made in America and a Made in Canada defense procurement approach. But last point, if I may, which maybe should have been my first point. When you go into a negotiation, you have to know where you stand. You have to know what you want. You have to be strong. You have to be clear. That's why we're setting out these policies. They're in the interests of Canada. They're the interests of Canadian workers. They're in the interest of Canadian security. And so we will be negotiating from a position of strength with the Americans. Thank you.
Good morning. Kate McKenna from the CBC.
Hi.
Members of the Liberal War Room, so the Central Campaign, distributed Stop the Steal buttons at a Conservative event. Given the anti-democratic implications of this phrase, how much does this event undermine the trust in the way that the Liberals operate, and what have you done in response to these revelations?
Thanks for the question. Look, this is totally unacceptable, to be absolutely clear. And I, on behalf of my campaign, I was unaware of this behavior, but on behalf of my campaign, I apologize for it unreservedly. Okay. I've made it absolutely clear to my campaign that this behavior or anything approximating it or in that spirit is unacceptable, cannot happen again. En français, si ça n'aurait pas dû arriver.
I can say that this should never have happened. It is completely unacceptable. As leader of the party and leader of the campaign, I want to unreservedly apologize for what happened, and I have told my campaign that this sort of thing must never happen again.
For my follow-up, Pierre announced today he would use the notwithstanding clause to push through his tough-on-crime agenda. Is there any case you'd invoke the clause to override the Charter?
I think this is a very dangerous step. We have a Charter of rights and fundamental freedoms in this country, and it's the responsibility, in my view, of the Prime Minister, of the Government of Canada to defend that Charter, those fundamental rights and responsibilities and liberties that Canadians enjoy. The politicizing certain issues with respect to fundamental rights is a slippery slope that leads to further politicization. And I understand if I was correctly briefed, it won't surprise you, I didn't watch Mr. Poilievre's press conference, but if I was correctly briefed that it relates to issues of heinous crimes and murders. You know, being tough on crime and being tough starts with being smart on crime. And it includes being tough on guns and gun violence. And I note that, with regret, that Mr. Poilievre has voted against every single gun control measure during his very long career as a career politician and member of the House of Commons. I think it's over 200 times. So we're focused on results. We've just tightened those gun measures with announcements which I think you saw a few days ago. We'll continue to do so. But we will defend the charter rights of Canadians on principle because it's the right thing to do.
Prochaine question.
En français, seulement sur la clause dérogatoire, s'il vous plaît.
On the notwithstanding clause, yes. With respect to the notwithstanding clause, I believe that it is the responsibility, and the Liberal Party and myself believe that it is the responsibility of the Government of Canada to defend the rights and freedoms of all Canadians. In other words, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. So, invoking the notwithstanding clause on a preemptive basis is not appropriate, and it's very dangerous, in my opinion. Radio-Canada, during his leadership race, Justin Trudeau released the value of his shares and financial interests before putting them in a blind trust to avoid criticism about possible conflicts of interest. I understand that you say you followed the rules, but why not go one step further, as Mr. Trudeau did, so there can be more transparency? Why not release information about your assets and your interests? Why didn't you do it before the blind trust? Well, that is already done. I have already put them in a blind trust. I did that before I became Prime Minister, and as I've said a number of times, I have followed all the rules well ahead of the time where I was supposed to. And now, in terms of assets, all I have left is money and personal property.
Somebody said en anglais.
Yes, in English, look, as you say, I followed all the rules. I've followed them in advance. I've disposed of my assets before I became Prime Minister. And have a blind trust. I have conflict of interest screens. I work only for the people of Canada. I work only for the people of Canada. Je travaille seulement pour des Canadiens, des Canadiens.
I'm only working for Canadians.
My only assets now are cash and personal property, which means a house and cottage.
Si on regarde, pardon, si on regarde les années 2020
looking at
à
the
2024,
years from 2000 to 2024, you were a resident of what country, and where did you pay taxes? In which country did you pay taxes? From 2020 to 2024? Well, I came back to Canada in July 2020, and from that point onward, I was a resident of Canada, and I paid my taxes right here in Canada. I'm Canadian. I live here. I live in Ottawa. And that's quite clear. I pay my taxes here in Canada. Hello, Mr. Carney, La Presse Canadienne. Your candidate in the riding of Châteauguay, Nathalie Provost, acknowledged in a radio program on Friday with Mr. Lagacé that she proposed to people in her riding to meet with Minister Dominique Leblanc for a funding cocktail party, but they had to pay $1,500 to do that. Is that acceptable to you? Are you comfortable with that type of thing? Well, this is news to me. I had not heard about this. There are funding events that are established to raise money for the party, and they are announced well in advance of the event. And I'm assuming that all the rules were followed in that regard. But I don't have any more information than that in response to your question. But I know that Ms. Provost is an exceptional candidate, and the Liberal Party and Canada are very lucky to have her running for Parliament in this election. And you said in your speech, and you said in your speech that President Trump is attacking Canadian workers, including Bombardier workers, but are you not afraid of reprisals when it comes to Bombardier's sales to the United States if you cancel the F-35 program? No, not at all, because we will be cautious and fair in the interests of Canada and in developing a new relationship with the U.S. The critical point here is that there will be a comprehensive negotiation with the United States between the Prime Minister of Canada and the President of the United States that will begin in 2 weeks' time. It's coming very soon. That time is coming. Who will be at the table for Canada? Myself or someone else? A government with an industrial strategy, a government with a strategy that recognizes Canada's strengths, a strategy that controls our own economic destiny, a strategy that diversifies our trading partners, a strategy that makes Canada strong, so that for Canada and for all of us, we can have the best possible negotiation with the United States. So I think that is myself. Hello, Mr. Carney. TVA. I just want to come back to the buttons we were talking about. You said this was unacceptable and you have apologized to the Conservative Party. Will you fire the members of your team that distributed those buttons at the Conservative event? Well, the people responsible for this have been removed from the campaign.
The responsible people for this issue have been reassigned within the campaign. That's it.
Prochaine question. Next question.
Well, hello, Mr. Carney. René Brumer, Montreal Gazette. Last night on Tout, monde, parle, you mentioned that for Justin Trudeau, the economy wasn't a main priority. Could you elaborate on what you meant by that and how you plan to differ?
Yeah. Of course, I'm speaking in relative terms, but I stand by what I said. I'll give you a few examples. You know, over the course of the last 10 years, the pace of government spending, particularly operational expenditures, rose by an average of 9% a year. 9% year after year after year. That's about twice the rate of growth of the economy. The level of government support for industry and business investment and housing and other factors will be considerable. You'll see when we release our detailed platform, our platform chiffré.
Costed platform.
That level of support is much lower than the level of support that we are going to give it. So we are focused on a government that spends less so that Canada can invest more. That we can invest more in defense, we can invest more in new trade corridors, we invest more in energy, clean and conventional, we can invest more in building new houses, all of those things. And we're going to use government to catalyze those investments. We're also going to have the better tax system, better regulation, all those other factors. I got into this race because I felt we needed to focus on the economy almost without fail. And rebalance that focus. So address the housing crisis, the cost of living crisis, the productivity challenge, and now, of course, what has come with that is this great economic crisis, tariff crisis, that the Americans have brought on us. So, in a sense, relative to the years of the previous government, these are big, big changes. These are not small changes. These are not changes in words. These are enormous economic changes, and they're exactly what's necessary to give ourselves far more than the Americans can take away, to build a stronger, confident Canada, to build a Canada that can lead, to build on innovation and strength, to build on, I mean, look around it, the expertise that is literally embodied by the workers here at Bombardier. That's the focus. It is a big change. A big change. Merci.
We'll have time for one last question. Dernière question. Bonjour, Monsieur Carney. Vous parlez de plus gros investissements en défense.
You're talking about major defense investments, but you haven't given us any costs. You're talking about what percentage increase and how long will it take for them to be made? Well, we will be disclosing the figures and a costed platform, in fact, in a couple of days. But I'm not going to start with the numbers. I'm going to start by talking about the needs of better security, the need for more jobs, and to strengthen our economy. One thing is very clear. Military spending will be significantly higher than 2% of GDP in a few years from now. It has to happen quickly because that's necessary for our own security. And we can do that in a way that will boost our industry, create jobs in Montreal, across Quebec, and across Canada. Thank you.
With respect to defense spending, I don't start with a percentage of GDP or what can be an arbitrary figure, but what do we need? What do we need as a country? We need to reinforce our security in the Arctic. We need to reinforce our security on the frontiers. We need to build a modern capabilities as part of our roles in things like the Coalition of the Willing. And we should do this, and this is what our plan is about, in a way that grows our economy, grows good jobs, grows strong companies, and grows in the future. Given those needs, given those priorities, I'm sure that our spending on defense, broadly speaking, will be above 2% of GDP within a few years. D'accord?
C'est ce qui m'a fait à notre conférence de presse. This puts an end to our press conference. Thank
merci
you.
beaucoup. Merci.
We have been listening in to Liberal Party leader Mark Carney, who is speaking in Dorval, Quebec. His announcement focusing on defense and protecting Canada's sovereignty by investing in defense. Carney says under a Liberal government, a new agency would be established, the Defense Procurement Agency, and this would, he says, streamline how the country obtains military equipment, specifically with a focus on buying Canadian. And this was just one part of Carney's announcement today, as we are, of course, just 2 weeks away from Election Day. And again, a focus here from Carney on how to handle the impact of tariffs and strengthen domestic industry given shifting policies and tariffs under the Trump administration, also protecting the country's sovereignty. I do want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor as she was listening in. Of course, that was the announcement. We also heard questions from our Kate McKenna, who is at the forefront of this reporting about two Liberal Party staffers attending the Canada Strong and Free networking conference, planting buttons there using Trump-style language. We heard from Mark Carney that he apologized for that happening and that the individuals who were responsible for it have been reassigned within the campaign.
Yeah, that's correct. Just quickly on that, I have sought some clarification from the Liberal War Room about what reassigned means, whether these were people who were in paying roles that they're now not in, or whether they were volunteers and, you know, fired, jumped, quit. So we can be a little bit more precise than reassigned here. So we'll have to check back if we get some clarification on that. But as you say, an unequivocal apology, a distancing from that tactic. And he said, as leader, sort of on behalf of the campaign, unreservedly, this must never happen again. So a pretty kind of clear statement on that. I want to talk about a couple other things, though. First, on the defense stuff, because there were some interesting kind of trade angles brought up from the questions from reporters here. And I think this is something that even folks sitting at home thinking about this issue need to go into with eyes wide open, because it is one thing to say we need a Made in Canada strategy. We're going to sort of be more strategic, think about sort of industrial policy as we procure these things for our military. But of course, if you want to do something fast, you might want to buy it off the shelf. We don't have a robust defense industry in Canada across the board for everything the military needs. If you put in a lot of rules about buying Canadian and Canadian components and Canadian jobs, in the past, that has lengthened the length of time before soldiers, get what they want, what they need. And so there is a real balancing act here. Every time someone goes back over procurement strategy and has a new approach, this would be going over sort of things that subsequent multiple governments have sort of tried to fix this and get the balance right. And it is perennially a difficult thing in this country. But there are also implications for the coming negotiations with the Trump administration in the U.S. Carney was referring to things shifting between Canada and the U.S., but if they start in on sort of looking for a reciprocal relationship in military trade, the one question was, could this have consequences for a company like Bombardier, where he is today, very important, sort of in like the Quebec Inc. kind of political milieu? Would this have consequences for Bombardier's ability to sell into the U.S.? Could the U.S. put up barriers against Bombardier that aren't in place right now when it comes to aerospace if Canada gets too protectionist when it comes to what it will buy from the U.S. for its military? Right now, the vast majority, and Carney has talked about this at previous debates and previous events, the vast majority of what Canada buys comes from the U.S. For its military. So if you're going to get in there and start changing that, and the Americans are taking accounting of that, be careful if you want to sort of stop buying American for political reasons. There could be consequences for your Canadian industry too. So this is going to be an extremely thorny matter to start to sort through for the winner of this election, whether it's Mark Carney or someone else. Now, just quickly, on the theme of the day, this issue of the notwithstanding clause, I want to take a moment to note his answer to, because spoiler alert, we're going to go to, I think, the NDP and the Bloc leader before the morning is out and get their takes on this. Mark Carney saying he thinks it's a very dangerous step to invoke the Charter, even in the limited way that Pierre Poilievre is speaking of. He's saying it's a responsibility of a Prime Minister and a government to defend the Charter. He says he doesn't think that politicizing this issue is a good idea. Carney called it a slippery slope. And he said being tough on crime should be about being smart on crime. And then he flipped the question around to lash out at the Conservatives for past votes against gun control when it comes to sort of doing something about violent crimes and multiple murders. So interesting to sort of watch the way he kind of turned that around. But as a Liberal leader wanting to defend on principle the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, very much, of course, part of the Liberal brand, that's where Mark Carney is coming down on what might turn out to be a bit of the talker of the day, this Conservative proposal.
And Janice, you're absolutely right. We are going to hear from other party leaders. That's Janice McGregor in Ottawa, and she'll be sticking around with us because we want to take our viewers now to Toronto. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is making an announcement while we were listening in to Mark Carney. So let's take you there now.
Here in Toronto, Danforth, amazing, and to the nurses, sharing your stories and your support means the world to me. Canadians are really worried about the threats to our country from Donald Trump, and they're also seeing that Donald Trump has had our healthcare system in his target. Back when we first negotiated CUSMA, he targeted medication prices and wanted to jack up prices to allow American pharmaceutical companies to make more profits off Canadians, and we fought back against that. But we know he's got his targets on healthcare in Canada. And so a part of the fight back and saying, no, we don't want to be the 51st state, we want to defend who we are as a country, is defending the values that we care about. And one of those values is that we take care of each other. And what represents that value is universal health care. Universal public health care is one of the things that Canadians are so proud of. When you think about being Canadian, you think about we take care of each other. We got a health care system that's there for you or your loved ones when you need it. But at the same time, we know that our healthcare system is in a crisis right now. We all have stories of going to an emergency room and waiting for hours and hours and wondering what's going to happen, wondering when you're going to get the care you need. Having a loved one, maybe your child in your arms, coughing or crying, and just waiting so long to get care. You've heard stories of seniors waiting to get care and surgeries. The wait times and the delays are really hurting our healthcare system. And we know that our frontline healthcare workers are doing everything that they can. They're amazing. They're working so hard, but they cannot deal with an impossible situation where there's just simply not enough healthcare workers. We're up against a crisis in our healthcare, and that crisis is a shortage of healthcare workers. It's all workers, but particularly nurses. And so we have a commitment today to defend our healthcare system. As was mentioned, we have made this a priority throughout the campaign. For us, healthcare is fundamental. It's who we are as Canadians. And at the federal level, we should be talking about it. It should be an item in the debate. And even though it's not right now, I'm going to bring it up in the debate. I'm going to challenge the other leaders on healthcare and their healthcare commitments, because only New Democrats have shown you again and again we are committed to defending this system, to keeping it public and universal, and expanding it and improving it. And so what do we need to do now to fight back against the threats to our healthcare system and the crisis that we're in? We need to hire more workers. And today I want to talk about how we need to hire more nurses specifically. So our plan is to hire 35,000 new nurses between now and 2030. We need to hire more nurses. But that's not enough. We don't just need to hire new nurses. We need to respect and retain the nurses we have. And one of the ways to do that was mentioned. We are committing to ensuring that there is an appropriate ratio between nurses and patients. Nurses want to provide the best care possible, the care that they were trained to do. But they cannot do that if the ratios are not appropriately set. How can a nurse provide the care, the life-saving care, the high-quality care, if they just don't have enough nurses to provide the right ratio? So we need the right ratios. We also know the conditions of work are directly related to the conditions of care. We have good work conditions, safe work conditions, appropriate nurse-patient ratios, and nurses are properly compensated, properly supported for the work they do. We have good outcomes in our healthcare system, and that's what we believe in. So we want to support nurses. We want to make sure they're properly paid. We also know that agency nursing is causing a big concern in our country. Agency nursing is setting up a two-tier system, and I don't blame nurses for this. These are for-profit companies that are offering higher pay. But why don't we just pay nurses more in the public system? That's what we should be doing. And so we've seen the Manitoba NDP take some really strong steps towards tackling this problem of agency nursing. We want to properly compensate. Nurses should get good pay and good work conditions for the work they're doing. And so we can do that. When we spend money on agency nursing, which is total about $1.5 billion over the past year, in 1 year alone. $1.5 billion. We know that that money is going to lining the pockets of a for-profit company. Instead, we could hire more nurses and pay them more. That's what we should be doing. And that's what Canadians expect of us. In addition, we have a plan around recruitment. There are a lot of internationally trained nurses that are in our country. We need to streamline the path for them to be recognized for their work and to be able to get qualified. We also know a lot of American nurses are looking at Canada and saying, maybe I want to work in America. Come on over. We welcome you here, and we're going to streamline the path for you to become nurses here in Canada. We also want to acknowledge the hard work of nurses and PSWs with a tax credit specifically to acknowledge their hard work, a $5,000 non-refundable tax credit. That's just a way of saying thank you, we appreciate you, and you matter. And so I think that's just one important additional thing. Ultimately, we know we need to recruit more, we need to retain the workers we have, we need to respect them better, and we can do that. We spend billions of dollars in healthcare transfers. Let's make a condition of those transfers that we have appropriate levels between nurse-patient ratio, that we have good pay for these nurses, and we hire enough nurses. We're going to tie healthcare funding to provinces that actually deliver on these priorities. And finally, I look at the other parties and see what they're offering around healthcare, where Pierre, Poilievre and the Conservatives have been very clear. They want to cut healthcare. They want to privatize it, make it more American, and it is shameful. That's not what Canadians want, and I think that's why more and more Canadians are starting to reject the Conservative message. They're saying cutting our healthcare system is not what we need to do. Cutting investments in something that's so important to Canadians, makes us proud to be Canadian, is the wrong thing. It's wrong for my family, it's wrong for me, and it's wrong for our country. So we're seeing more and more Canadians reject that. But Canadians are taking a hard look at Mark Carney now and are noticing he's talking a lot about cutting as well. In fact, Liberals themselves have mentioned, longtime Liberals, that Mark Carney's plan will require massive cuts to achieve. In fact, we've tallied up the cuts that he's proposing, and it's going to be $43 billion in cuts. What does that mean? How much is that going to cut from our healthcare system? Will he be cutting nurses? Will he be cutting frontline healthcare workers? These are the questions I'm going to ask him in the debate, because he can't get away with saying that he's going to cut massively without New Democrats standing up and saying, no, we're never going to let that happen. Not on our watch. We're going to fight back and defend our healthcare system. And so I ask Canadians right now, especially here in the city of Toronto, Torontonians, if you want someone that's going to stand up for you and your family, that's going to fight to defend our healthcare system and improve it and fix the problems in this crisis, vote for a New Democrat. If you want someone that's going to say, no matter what, I'm never going to let healthcare be on the negotiating table with Donald Trump and the Americans, then vote for a New Democrat. If you want someone in Ottawa that's going to fight to defend our healthcare system against the cuts proposed by Mark Carney, vote for a New Democrat. It's because Canadians voted for New Democrats that we've achieved so much. Our universal health care was only possible because Canadians voted for New Democrats and sent Tommy Douglas to Ottawa, and he brought in universal health care. Yep. And because you voted for us and sent 25 of us to Ottawa, we were able to bring in dental care and the first steps on farming care. So if you want New Democrats to be in Ottawa to fight for you, you got to vote for them. And here in Toronto, vote for your New Democrat candidate. Here in Toronto, Danforth, vote for Claire Haxel. That's someone that's going to fight for you and stand up for you. I'll do that again in French, and then I look forward to your questions. Donc, on sait qu'il y a beaucoup d'incertitudes.
So we know there's a lot of uncertainty that's been caused by the chaos brought to our doors by President Trump. He is targeting our healthcare system, and he wants to privatize our system to create more profits for his country. But a source of pride for all Canadians and Quebecers is our universal healthcare system. We believe that represents our values, the value of looking after each other, and we do that through a free universal healthcare system. But our healthcare system is currently in crisis. It's a national crisis. Right across this country, we're seeing that our healthcare system is experiencing a lot of issues. And the reason we're in this situation is because there is a real shortage of healthcare workers within the system, all workers, but particularly nurses. So our commitment, because New Democrats will defend the system, is that we will hire 35,000 new nurses by 2030. And our plan is not only about hiring new nurses. We want to retain the ones that we have. And that means we have to respect them. We have to give them good pay for the work they do. And we want to ensure there is an appropriate nurse-to-patient ratio in place. In terms of working conditions, of course, those working conditions are tied to care conditions. And as New Democrats, we understand that. That's why we will respect workers and respect nurses. We also want to recruit new nurses. We know that there are a number of people who have been with international training that are living in Canada, and we want to facilitate the process so those nurses can work here in Canada. Canada. But it requires a will. It requires the will to defend our healthcare system. And that is our will as the NDP. We're not here to defend CEOs. We're here to defend your interests. And your interest is in a healthcare system that's public and universal. And we will respect the workers so that we can attain that goal. But what is the plan of the other leaders? Mr. Poilievre is talking about massive cuts to the healthcare system. He wants to cut investment, he wants to cut transfers, and he wants to cut healthcare, and that will be very costly for you. And Canadians increasingly are rejecting that approach. They know that it's not good for themselves and their family or for their country. And that's very positive to see that. But at the same time, people are looking at Mark Carney, and he's also talking about cuts. We analyzed all his promises, and that represents cuts of some $43 billion. That's a massive cut in what he intends to cut. Healthcare workers, nurses, and in spite of the fact that in the debate healthcare is not necessarily a topic, I will raise this and I will directly ask Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney what their plans are when it comes to cutting healthcare. And I will say it's the wrong thing to do. If you want someone who will defend our healthcare system, vote for the NDP. Elect as many New Democrat MPs as possible. We know that government works better when one party does not have all the power. So we need strong NDP MPs in Ottawa, so vote for the NDP. And by voting for us, we will have power. You'll be giving us the power to invest in health care. And that's thanks to your support. So in this election, vote for the NDP if you want someone who will defend your healthcare system. Vote for Claire Haxel and other candidates across the country. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Nous allons maintenant passer à la période de questions des journalistes. Une question et une relance par journaliste. We'll now take the questions from the press. One question, one follow-up, and we'll start with Olivia Stefanovic from CBC.
Good morning, Mr. Singh. Would you ever consider using the notwithstanding clause to override charter rights, and if so, for what purpose?
No, I think it's wrong to do so. I think we should not be using the notwithstanding clause. And I'm concerned, and I mentioned this before, I'm concerned with the fact that it's being used more and more. Charter rights, human rights should not be things that we are willing to ignore or put to the side. And I'm worried that it's becoming more and more commonplace that the notwithstanding clause is being used.
Could you answer in French on the notwithstanding clause? No, I will never invoke the notwithstanding clause because I very deeply believe in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and people's rights. These are fundamental freedoms and we must defend them.
This morning, you were asked whether you would stay on as party leader if your party loses status after the federal election, and you didn't give a clear answer. Are we to take that as a no, that you will be stepping aside as leader of the federal NDP if your party does not achieve federal party status?
No, I'm not worried about that. I'm focused on the election in front of me, and I said that earlier today. That's not my focus. My focus is we've got 2 weeks left of this election. We've got debates coming up very soon, and I want Canadians to know the choice that they have in this election. The choice is you got Pierre Poilievre who wants to cut the things you need. You got Mark Carney, who's also proposing massive cuts to our health care. And you got New Democrats who want to defend it. So if you want someone that's going to defend our health care, vote for a New Democrat.
Thank you. La prochaine question, Valérie Gamache, Radio-Canada.
Monsieur Singh, je veux revenir sur la clause de dérogation, parce que M. Poilievre, ce qu'il propose ce matin, c'est de l'utiliser pour rétablir les peines consécutives pour des meurtriers qui auraient commis plusieurs meurtres. Est-ce que, selon vous, faut quand même durcir le ton envers ces meurtriers qui tuent plusieurs personnes? Il donne l'exemple, par exemple,
What do you think of that idea?
Avec le système de justice criminelle, je pense que les juges ont le pouvoir, ont la capacité de mettre en œuvre des pénalités sévères et c'est important de faire ça.
Develop sentences and hand down those sentences.
Ma priorité, ça c'est horrible, les gens qui tuent les personnes.
I know that it's horrible to see people murdering others, and there need to be severe penalties for them. But in general, our approach in this country is to try to prevent crime before crimes are committed. That's why we need more officials at the border to put a stop to illegal guns and illegal drugs crossing our border into Canada. So that is our priority as a party. We need to stop crime before it happens. But you're saying that healthcare is not a part of the theme in the debate this week. Is that going to harm you? Well, I think it's a question of priorities for Canadians and Quebecers. Healthcare is a priority. So I think it's wrong not to include that as a theme in the debate. But I will raise that issue during the debate. I will call on the other leaders to tell us what they intend to cut. They say they will cut health care, and I want to know what their plans are, how they intend to cut, what they will cut, where they will cut. So for me, it's clear we have to invest more in our healthcare system. We have to defend it. It is a Canadian value. It's a Quebec value. And New Democrats will do that.
Sure. I think it's not about me and whether it's helpful or hurtful to me in the debate. I think it's wrong that healthcare, which is a major priority for Canadians, is not in the debate because Canadians think it's important, all right? It should be in there. And we know that given particularly the threats to our country, Canadians are really starting to examine what is it that makes us Canadian? What are we proud of as Canadians? And one of the things that comes up again and again is our healthcare system. It's a source of pride. People are proud that we have a universal public healthcare system, but they're also worried, deeply worried that it's in crisis right now. And so while it's not a theme in the debates, I will be bringing it up. I will be challenging the other leaders on their plans to cut healthcare at a time when we need to invest in it and strengthen it. And I will challenge both Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre on their plans to cut. And if you want someone that's going to defend healthcare, vote for a New Democrat.
Thank you. Next question, Abigail Beeman, CTV.
After people were spotted at Conservative rallies wearing shirts and holding signs that said, "Do you believe the polls?" reporters asked Mr. Poilievre if he believed the polls. And I thought it was interesting that this morning in 2 interviews you said twice that you thought polling wasn't accurately capturing NDP support. So do you believe the polls?
Yeah, and so, I mean, there's a conservative approach which is kind of gives you a little bit of like, they're not going to accept the outcome of the election. I will absolutely accept the outcome of the election. Without a doubt, I support democracy. It's in our party's name. 100% will accept whatever the outcomes are. But I was pointing out, rightly so, that polling doesn't seem to capture New Democrat support as well as other parties, because very recently, just a couple of months ago, we had a winter election in Ontario, and it was said that New Democrats would lose party status, that the leader would lose their seat, and that didn't happen. In fact, the leader won their seat. Marcel's won her seat in a resounding way, and New Democrats were able to hold on to official opposition. So I'm pointing out specifically that for some reason polling doesn't seem to capture New Democrat support very well. Many of the major polls, really credible ones, had New Democrats losing party status, and we did the opposite. We actually had official opposition. So pointing to that concrete example is what I'm talking about. Please don't confuse me with Conservatives who are suggesting that they're not going to support or accept the outcome of the election. I will accept whatever the outcome of the election is.
Yesterday in Timmins, your outgoing MP, Carol Hughes, told us twice actually that she considers Donald Trump to be performing foreign interference in our Canadian election. Do you agree?
I mean, what he's doing is threatening our country. He's threatening our sovereignty. He's threatening us with economic pressure like he threatened to do, like he said he would do. And I think that's a serious concern. There are real concerns about foreign interference in our country, and the public inquiry talked about specifically China, India, and we also know that Iran is engaged in foreign interference. Canadians need to know that we're going to do everything possible to keep them free from foreign interference. No one should be living in fear in our country that just by exercising their democratic rights to critique other countries or raise their concerns, that should somehow result in them being harassed or intimidated. That should never happen. And my commitment is to make sure I do everything possible to defend Canadians.
Thank you. La prochaine question, Étienne Fortin-Gauthier, Nouveau Info.
Bon matin, M. Singh, vous allez bien?
Hello, Mr.
Oui,
Singh.
en 2021, lors des dernières élections à Toronto, dans plusieurs des circonscriptions, votre parti a eu 20-30% du vote, vous arriviez deuxième.
You came in second in a number of ridings, and we've been talking to people who voted for you in the last election and said they're going to turn to the Liberals this time around. How do you explain the fact that even people who supported you in the last election are turning against you? Well, we have 2 weeks ahead of us and 2 debates, and we can share our message. For people who are afraid of Donald Trump, I think the real issue in this election has changed. But increasingly, I note that people are rejecting conservative cuts under Pierre Poilievre. People think his approach is wrong for the country. But also people are starting to look at Mark Carney and thinking, well, he is also talking about cuts. And his plan will mean a cut of $43 billion. Even Liberals like Karina Gould mentioned that Mark Carney's plan means massive cuts in health care and in services that people need. So for people who are afraid of cuts under Mark Carney, cuts to our healthcare system, well, I'm encouraging you to vote for the NDP, because we are the only party that will always defend our public healthcare system against these kinds of cuts. If you want a public universal healthcare system, vote for us. So you think the polls may not be accurate, but these are even progressives who vote NDP in provincial elections, and they're not ready to support you this time. Well, as I said, we have 2 weeks ahead of us, and there are debates that will be happening this week, and in these debates, I will be sharing our plans, and I will be calling on Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre to explain why they want to cut. And obviously, if you want to defend someone to defend the healthcare system, you should vote for the NDP.
Next question, Rihanna Lim, Canadian Press.
What's your reaction to, going back to the notwithstanding clause, what's your reaction to Pierre Poilievre vowing to use the notwithstanding clause to ensure that those who have committed multiple murders stay behind bars for the rest of their lives?
Well, we obviously need to have severe penalties for people that commit horrible crimes. And right now we have that ability. We've got a criminal justice system where judges are able to make that determination. And that should continue as is. When it comes to the notwithstanding clause, I believe that we should not be using it. It undermines the Charter, and the Charter is an important list of rights that people should have. But when it comes to crime, everyone in our country should be safe. You should be able to be safe at home. You should be safe when you go to work, when you take public transit. You should be safe when you play in the local playground with your kids. People deserve to be safe. And what we're focused on is how do we prevent crime before it happens? And that's why we're focused on stopping the flow of illegal guns that are used in violent crimes and stopping illegal drugs from crossing the border. And that our plan is to stop crime before it happens by stopping the things used in crime, the weapons used, the drugs that are poisoning our communities. And so that's our focus. How do we stop crime before it happens?
If you say that the notwithstanding clause undermines the Charter, do you believe it's time to eliminate it altogether?
Well, we've raised concerns about the fact that it's being used more often at the provincial levels, and it's been used in ways that undermine people's rights, and I think that's wrong. And so we were looking at ways to close down its use or to restrict its use, because it's deeply problematic that provincial governments are undermining workers' rights and threatening to use the notwithstanding clause for that. Undermining human rights and using notwithstanding clause to do that. I think those are both very problematic things.
Thank you. Next question, John Ivison, National Post.
Mr. Singh, notwithstanding your doubts about, not the notwithstanding clause, but your doubts about NDP polling, do you think it's safe now for New Democrats who've been supporting the Liberals to keep out the Conservatives? The polls between the Liberals and the Conservatives seem to have stabilised. Do you think it's safe for those people to come home now?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're going to say to people. That's funny that you say that. Yeah, for a lot of folks, I think we're really worried about the Conservatives. And I think what people have seen is that particularly Pierre Poilievre and his message and his approach, people were finding not only was he talking about cutting healthcare and cutting services at a time when we shouldn't be doing that, he sounded all too familiar or all too similar to Donald Trump himself. And at a time when people are rejecting Donald Trump, Pierre Poilievre sloganeering and attack using kind of the same catchphrases, attacks on wokeism, and just these kind of silly slogans at a time when we need serious responses to real problems. I think more and more Canadians are saying, no, that's not it for me. And so I would invite you all, people living in Toronto, if you're worried now, after having turned your attention away from Pierre Poilievre, if you're worried that you're hearing more and more about cuts coming from Mark Carney, specifically $43 billion in cuts to services. And he said it really clearly that he wants to cut spending. He said where he wants to cut spending in the operating budget. He's outlined what's in the operating budget: health transfers, old age security, pensions, and he said he would cut there. If you're worried about those cuts, vote for a New Democrat, and we will stand up and defend against those cuts.
Do you think you've been naive? I mean, you tout the achievements made by the 25 New Democrats, dental care and pharmacare. Do you think you've been naive that you're not getting the credit for it and the Liberals are?
I think Canadians know that we did it, and I think Canadians acknowledge that this would never have happened but for New Democrats being there. I think people could look back in history and see that Liberals don't act unless forced to. And there's a couple of really concrete examples. The pharmacare example is really clear. 30 years the Liberals had promised to bring in pharmacare. Literally back in the 90s they first promised it. 3 decades of broken promises. And the only time we were able to move forward is when New Democrats forced them to do so. So I think it's very clear in people's minds that we're the ones that made it happen. Dental care as well. I remember when we finally got the Liberals to agree to do it, and they said it was going to take 7 years to implement. And we said, no way, we can't wait 7 years. Let's get this done right away. And now we're going to have the final phase rolled out in just a month's time. In May, everyone in our country who earns less than $90,000 will get access to dental care coverage. So we're proud of that. We're proud of it. But I don't want people to think that just because we fought for you, that that's enough reason for you to vote for us. I want you to know that we did fight and deliver things for you as a proof point that if we now promise to bring in things like a price cap on grocery essentials, to bring in a rent control that's national, to take on corporate landlords and stop them from buying up affordable homes, trust us, we can fight to deliver these things as well. And when we say we're going to respect nurses, hire more nurses, make sure there's good patient-nurse ratios, and lift up and make sure we well pay these nurses so we can have more of them, trust me when I say this because I care deeply about our healthcare system. I'm going to fight to protect these workers and our healthcare system.
Thank you very much. That concludes our press conference for today. C'est ce qui met fin à notre conférence de presse pour aujourd'hui.
We have been listening there to the NDP leader, Jagmeet Singh, as he is speaking in Toronto. Hello and welcome inside the CBC newsroom. I'm Arthi Pol. We heard from Jagmeet Singh, him really focusing in on healthcare in Canada, specifically on nurses, pledging that if an NDP government is elected, they would hire 35,000 more nurses in Canada's healthcare system, do more work to recruit and retain nurses and personal care workers as well. That was the majority of his announcement. But of course, he was asked a lot of questions about what's happening right now with the campaign, specifically an announcement from the Conservative Party leader this morning in talking about consecutive sentences for mass murderers. We heard Pierre Poilievre, the Conservative Party leader, saying that he would use or invoke the notwithstanding clause or Section 33 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to restore consecutive sentences. And we heard there Jagmeet Singh say that he believes that that is not something he would use and that it's something that shouldn't necessarily be invoked. I do want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She was listening in there. Part of what we heard also from Jagmeet Singh is he was saying that this isn't something that's going to be focused on in the debates, and we're going to get to that in a moment. But he thinks that healthcare should certainly be something. And he also faced question about his party and how it might perform in this upcoming election.
Yeah, a lot here, but to the announcement first, because this is kind of the other piece of an announcement from earlier in the campaign about increasing family medicine practitioners, doctors. A stop in St. John's was used to unveil that part. This specifically about the need for more nurses in the system, and for everyone watching at home and thinking, isn't that provincial jurisdiction? You bet it is. Nevertheless, the federal NDP laying out what it would like to see, better nurse-to-patient ratios, guaranteed fair wages, wages, improved working conditions, and so on. How would the NDP propose to do this? Well, much like with the announcement about getting everybody a family doctor down the road, the proposal here is to tie future federal health transfers to provinces and sort of the folks in charge of this jurisdictionally, tying any additional money that might flow from Ottawa to the ability to sort of demonstrate that there is a real plan in place to meet these goals as laid out. So talking about things like ending the reliance on private nursing agencies, talking about providing incentives for the provinces to fast-track the accreditation in their various spheres of influence, if you will, for foreign-trained nurses to come to Canada and meet labour shortages here. Also actively recruiting, like we saw with the doctors example a couple of weeks back, professionals from the U.S. fast-tracking their credentials so they can step right into roles here, and sort of the need to pay student nurses so they're not doing unpaid work to fill gaps. Also the proposal for a healthcare workers tax credit, which is kind of an interesting idea. That one is inside federal jurisdiction, this idea that sort of personal support workers, often very poorly paid, give them a $5,000 tax credit. It might be an incentive for more people to pursue that line of work. So this is part of a bigger health care workforce strategy that the NDP has been sort of dealing out. Wants to talk about healthcare more because they believe that is a good issue for them, not just because their party historically tied to the Medicare system in this country, but also they feel it's something tangible that they can say to people, elect New Democrats, we will deliver, because they believe they were the ones that helped deliver dental care for people who didn't have it, certain drugs covered in certain places in a way that it wasn't before, because of their making a priority of this and putting pressure on the Liberals in the minority government situation, which gets you to that question about, do you believe the polls? What about the polls? You know, can you persuade, if the Liberals are on track to win this, people to return to the NDP, because they have been polling at sort of quite low levels throughout this campaign, stubbornly so. Jagmeet Singh repeatedly saying he isn't worried about that. He just wants to sort of keep sort of driving the message, but also noting, and I heard him do this when I was out with the New Democrats before, noting that it is fact that the NDP often outperforms their polls, particularly in ridings where they are strong on the ground, where they have provincial help, where the brand recognition is strong. You do sometimes see NDP incumbents survive, notwithstanding the doom and gloom in the overall polls. And we heard him talk about the Ontario election, where they outperformed their polls in Northern Ontario and some Southwestern Ontario seats in particular. So they're hoping to do that again. They're hoping the circumstances are pointing to that, notwithstanding what a national seat projection might tell you, but also saying that's different than sort of being skeptical about polls generally, more sort of saying, well, I accept that overall it might be this, but in places where we think we can win, that doesn't mean sort of that there's lost hope for having a significant NDP caucus in the next parliament that can make a difference, if I'm paraphrasing him correctly on that.
And now, Janice, too, I was touching on the fact that while we were listening to the NDP leader, we saw that details were released about the upcoming leaders' debates that are going to be taking place on Wednesday and Thursday, specifically some of the themes: affordability, energy and climate, of course, tariffs. Walk us through some of what we've learned about what we can expect to see on Wednesday and Thursday.
Yeah, it was interesting because Singh's question, actually, he was asked about the fact that healthcare isn't going to be one of the debate topics per se in either English or French, and he said he's going to bring it up anyway. So I guess that's on his scale as a debater to sort of find an opening in the conversation and kind of go there. But we do know the topics. They're a little different in French and English. I'll try and read them off quickly. Wednesday night, of course, the French debate moderated by Radio-Canada's Patrice Roy. The topics will be cost of living, energy and climate, the ongoing trade war, identity and sovereignty, always sort of perhaps a particular debate in French in this country, and then immigration and foreign affairs. The English debate the following night, Thursday evening, moderated by TV Ontario's Steve Paikin. The topics: affordability and cost of living, again, that the same, energy and climate the same. But the third topic, rather than trade war, leading in a crisis is how they're framing it in English. The fourth topic, public safety and security. priority. That's different than the fourth topic in French. And the final topic, tariffs and threats to Canada, that is different than the fifth topic in French, which is going to be more focused on immigration and foreign affairs. So a little bit of two solitudes action, right? I think it sort of says a few things about how issues are different in different regions of this country, on different voters' minds, that there are true cultural and language gaps in terms of priorities. If you're bilingual, you can watch them both and catch it all. But Wednesday and Thursday night, if you're into politics and you want to see how all of these leaders perform, that's when to tune in.
Janice, thank you. That is the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. And now we want to take our viewers to Quebec City because Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet just commented on the Conservative Party leader's pledge to use that notwithstanding clause for crime legislation. So let's listen to his response.
The notwithstanding clause has been created during what we call in French la nuit des non-couteaux, this huge treason, betrayal of Quebec, offered by Mr. Chrétien under the orders of Mr. Trudeau's father in order to get a deal against Quebec. And it said basically that provinces, parliaments would keep that measure of sovereignty, being able to remove themselves from the application of the federal chart. It hasn't been conceived for the federal government to use it against a federal law. But still, it is legal. It may happen. But when you are in the position of a person that wants to be Prime Minister of Canada, you should rely more on improving justice system and laws than removing yourself from their application.
En suivi, hier, à Tout le monde en parle,
So we were listening there to the Bloc Québécois leader as he was commenting on an announcement earlier today by Pierre Poilievre, who vowed to use the notwithstanding clause in order to restore consecutive sentences for mass murderers. Essentially, we heard from Yves-François Blanchet that he says leaders should be using this as an opportunity to improve upon the criminal system here in Canada, or the justice system rather than trying to use these sorts of clauses to take action and to make changes in that particular way. And we've been talking a lot about how we are 2 weeks away now from Canadians heading to the polls. This could be a potentially pivotal week in the federal election campaign because the two leaders' debates are being held in Montreal. We were discussing details of that debate, have been released now in terms of what themes they've been talking about. We'll be talking about, and CBC News will bring you live coverage of both the debates. The French debate is on Wednesday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. It will be broadcast live with simultaneous interpretation on CBC News Network and everywhere you stream CBC News. The English language debate is Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific on CBC TV and CBC News Network. It will be rebroadcast at 9 p.m. Pacific on CBC News Network and CBC Gem. And we also want to remind you that you can watch CBC News Network for free for the remainder of the federal election campaign. In fact, until May 5th, you can watch it on your cable provider or online on CBC Gem, CBCNews.ca, and on the CBC News app. Okay, so let's continue with our election coverage, and we want to turn to some of the issues that are top of mind for Canadians. CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick has been visiting various communities in Ontario during the campaign, and today she's in Sudbury in Northern Ontario. It's one of the largest mining hubs in the country, and just like in many other areas, affordable housing and illegal drug use are major concerns. Hey, Megan, nice to see you. So what are you learning about these issues in Sudbury?
Well, Sudbury is a fast-growing city. The population has been growing in the last couple of years, but what's also growing here, I'm hearing, Arthi, is the number of people experiencing homelessness. And as you mentioned, this is an issue that's being faced by communities across the country, and so is opioid addiction and overdoses. So we are hearing about those issues during our time here in Sudbury. And yesterday I met with two women who are trying hard to work on those issues and address those challenges. One of those women is Denise Sandel, who lost her son to a toxic toxic drug overdose in 2020. In the wake of that, she erected a memorial cross at a downtown Sudbury intersection to pay tribute to her son, Miles. And that memorial kept growing and growing over the years now. There are dozens and dozens, more than 200 crosses have been erected paying tribute to people who have died. And she also started a charity called SOS. And every Sunday afternoon, she distributes clothing and supplies and food to those in need. And that's where I met her yesterday. And we had a chat about the federal election and about what she's looking for in terms of commitments from federal party leaders and whether she thinks enough attention is being paid to the opioid crisis during this campaign. She said she understands there are other issues that are taking up a lot of the oxygen, including the trade war and relations with the U.S., but she does wish that more attention was being paid to this issue. Here's some of our conversation.
There's a ripple effect to all these deaths, and really they're deaths that are preventable, you know. Yeah, I'd like to hear about what we're going to do about the toxic drugs. These are poison drugs. This isn't about addiction. People aren't dying of addiction. They're dying of drugs that kill. And yeah, I would love to hear that a candidate has some interest in that.
She was talking about the need for more federal investments in communities like Sudbury for more addiction services, more mental health care. As for how she's doing, she says she's trying her best to cope with her loss and that she does this work like the charity she started to turn her pain into purpose, she said. She described the situation here in Sudbury as dire and that this is an opioid emergency, she says. We also met with a community health nurse, Carla Garty, and she described the situation in Sudbury right now is very bleak. She used to work at a safe consumption site that operated here in Sudbury, but that's now closed down. We met her there yesterday. Beside that former site is an encampment where people experiencing homelessness are living. We had a chat there with her about what she'd like to see discussed in this federal campaign. Take a listen.
If you look around, there's so many more people who are really struggling to find housing, like double the amounts that we've had, you know, since our last point in time count. And you're not just seeing that in Sudbury, you're seeing it in North Bay, you're seeing it in the Soo, you're seeing it all across the north, and I'm sure you're seeing it, and you're seeing it in Southern Ontario as well. So it's a stark reminder that, you know, many people in our communities are really, really struggling.
So more healthcare services, more truly affordable housing are needed in this community, we're hearing. Just in January and February alone, Arthi, 24 people have died of toxic drug overdoses in the Sudbury area. So for those two women, at least, those are some of the issues that are top of mind for them.
And Megan, what about the voters that you're speaking with? What are you hearing from them on their priorities?
Yeah, as for other voters, other than Denise and Carla, we've been talking to residents here in Sudbury about issues that matter to them. We caught up with some voters on their way into a basketball game in downtown Sudbury yesterday. Common theme I was hearing again was housing, affordability of housing, and healthcare as well, and a lack of access to it in cities like Sudbury. I met one woman who's an older woman, and she said her and her husband, they do have a doctor, but that doctor is more than an hour away outside of Sudbury. And she said the older they get, the harder it is for them to make that trip back and forth. Here's what else I was hearing.
Cost of living and high taxes. Things have gotten out of hand over the past 5-6 years, and it's time we need a change.
The economy. I'm 19. You know, I still have many years on this earth, and I want to be able to afford a house. I want to be able to, you know, live day by day. You know, but life is unaffordable right now.
Housing for people, I know especially here in Sudbury, like there is a shortage and more people need housing, whether that's rentals or building.
And we're here at a coffee shop this morning. Arthur, I've been talking to customers here this morning about the election. I spoke to one gentleman who said relations with the U.S., the trade war, that is his #1 issue, and he's going to vote accordingly in terms of who he thinks, in terms of who should be prime minister, can handle that best. So interesting to hear that that is influencing his vote. And again, healthcare was another common issue I've been hearing about from voters here at this coffee shop this morning.
Megan, thanks for this. That's the CBC's Megan Fitzpatrick in Sudbury, Ontario. Now stay with us. Still to come, voters in the north put sovereignty and defense top of mind this election, and they have a few ideas on how to improve the Arctic through investment in local communities. That story is just ahead right here on CBC News Network.